Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, the Brexit endgame. It's complicated. It's messy. We'll look at what just happened in the UK's divorce proceedings from the European Union. Also this week, oil's new power play, why OPEC's top producer, Saudi Arabia, wants to slam the brakes on production. And the strong bond between China and Iran, how it's being tested by tough US sanctions. A draft deal has been served, but it's proving too hard to stomach. We're talking this week about the UK's divorce from the European Union, Brexit. Now, it's Friday morning here in Doha as I speak, and as anyone who's been following this messy breakup knows, it's complicated. Events are moving so fast that by now, when you're watching, anything could have happened. But the deal agreed by the UK and the EU has been described in rather unglowing terms as at least bad Brexit. UK Prime Minister Theresa May says the draft agreement she managed to stitch together is in the national interest. Addressing the nation, she said that it's better than no deal and that she wants to use it as the basis for negotiating the future economic relationship with the European Union. But getting her divorce accord ratified by Parliament may prove impossible. Her Brexit secretary and other ministers quit because they hate it. Let's take a closer look. Well, the draft agreement focuses a lot on new proposals over the Irish border. Both sides have committed to avoiding a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. There's an arrangement to keep the UK within the EU's customs union after Brexit for a certain amount of time. The customs union is the arrangement by which the EU members apply the same tariffs to products imported from the rest of the world. Critics say that part of the plan will trap the UK in the bloc's orbit for years. Banks are unhappy. The plan gives UK banks, insurers and asset managers limited access to European financial markets. And even within the EU, there are objections. The French are upset because the draft leaves fisheries outside the single UK-EU customs zone. Al Jazeera's Jonah Hull reports now from London.
A Prime Minister embattled on multiple fronts, but one determined to keep fighting.
I believe with every fibre of my being that the course I have set out is the right one for our country and all our people.
By the media, she was asked if she was in denial about the chances of her Brexit deal's success. "You're in office but not in power," said one journalist. "If there is a leadership contest, will you contest it?" asked another.
Sir William Cash.
And there was little support to be found in Parliament.
Broken promises, failed negotiations and abject capitulation to the EU.
It is therefore mathematically impossible to get this deal through the House of Commons.
The choice is now clear. We stand up for the United Kingdom, the whole of the United Kingdom, the integrity of the United Kingdom, or we vote for a vassal state with the breakup of the United Kingdom. That's the choice.
Theresa May says she's doing her job and she believes she's doing the right thing for the country. Her draft Brexit deal, she insists, protects jobs and gives the nation back control of its laws, of its money and of its borders. The alternative, she warned, leaving the EU with no deal, is a path of deep and grave uncertainty. But among those who resigned on Thursday, including 2 cabinet ministers and those who opposed the Prime Minister and her deal on the right of the Conservative Party, there may soon be sufficient numbers to launch a leadership contest.
I think the letters will go in, but I'm not giving a time frame. What we need is a leader who will say to the European Union, it is impossible to divide up the United Kingdom. It is impossible to agree to a situation where we have a perpetual customs union. It is impossible to pay £39 billion of taxpayers' money for a few promises.
For now, Theresa May carries on, and her Brexit deal, in theory at least, moves to Brussels next week for the approval of EU leaders. Its survival, though, and indeed hers, are not assured.
Well, if you can't make sense of the politics, the UK currency may prove to be a more reliable barometer. Think of it as a kind of Brexit weather forecast. On Thursday, the pound fell 1.7% against the dollar, its steepest percentage slide since October 2016. Derivatives markets are signalling that the volatility in the UK currency is likely to continue. That means that worries about the impact that Brexit drama is having on the UK economy are growing. Joining us now from London, Lorenzo Cordono. Lorenzo is the founder of London-based LC Macro Advisors and chief economist there. Lorenzo, great to have you with us on Counting the Cost. Does this draft agreement actually do enough to attract investment to the UK and to allow the UK to do the trade deals that it says it wants to do outside of the European Union?
Well, let's put it away. I mean, it's negative anyway. I mean, Brexit is negative. It's negative for the UK, deeply negative for the UK. It's certainly also negative for the rest of the EU. So there's no doubt that any kind of deal that you can actually strike with the UK and the EU on the other hand is going to be negative. But at least it's less negative than other options that are on the table. For instance, I think it would be highly disruptive if there is no deal and the UK ends up with the kind of WTO backstop with no effective, no agreement on anything. So that would be very disruptive in my view, would increase sharply uncertainty. So this solution today, the one that is on the table and is not yet 100% sure, clearly, I mean, it has to go through the political process and approval. I think is the least damaging option that is on the table.
All right. It's possibly too early to say in answer to this question, but what, in your opinion, does this draft agreement mean for the loosening of government purse strings in the UK and the ending of austerity?
Well, ending of austerity, effectively the budget, the latest budget is already suggesting something like that. I think it's probably going to end a long period of uncertainty, political uncertainty in the UK, which I think started with the referendum. And this is good news in my view. Too much time in the UK has been detracted, has been subtracted by this whole issue. And I think the government has more important things to do. But again, this big deal, took a lot of time, a lot of efforts, and it was basically pushed for government action, which has been a little bit dysfunctional. So I think it's good news if it reaches, at least we have a deal. But again, it's not finished. And we need to very much monitor the next few days and next few weeks whether this will go through.
Lorenzo, who ultimately will end up paying for Brexit?
Well, ultimately it will be UK people. But as I mentioned before, I think this deal is negative also for the EU. So it's a lose-lose proposition. So everybody's going to lose. But clearly the UK will going to lose more than the EU.
You say that everybody's going to lose. Well, what about the people of Northern Ireland? Will they be happy with this deal? The DUP, the party that helps Theresa May govern, they provide her, effectively her parliamentary majority. They don't speak for everyone in the UK, even though they're unhappy with this draft withdrawal agreement.
Yeah, I think there is still an open issue there, but we don't know all the details yet. And we will see over the next few days and weeks how this will translate into actual decision, actual actions on the ground. But for what we know so far, it seems to be the least damaging solution also for Northern Ireland, because the alternative would be much more disruptive.
Lorenzo, we've been talking on Counting the Cost about Brexit for 2 years, since the referendum to the decision to leave the European Union. How would you make sense of it for our audience on the programme outside of the EU and the UK in particular? Is it possible to sum up, to make sense of Brexit in one simple sentence?
I think it has been a massive distraction of efforts, of energies, and I think it was really a misguided decision, but we have to live with that. And UK people decided to leave the EU. I think the government has to deliver. But again, it has been a massive distraction from more important issues.
Lorenzo, it's been great to talk to you. Many thanks indeed for being with us on Counting the Cost.
Thanks.
So it's a distraction. Meanwhile, people are getting poorer in Britain, and the United Nations is trying to find out why. The world body is to investigate areas in the UK hardest hit by a decade of austerity. One such place is the town of Jazeera on England's east coast. From there, Al Jazeera's Lawrence Lee reports.
Half a century ago, Jazeera was a thriving holiday resort, though it's hard to imagine now. For years, this village on the east coast of England has been listed as one of the UK's poorest places. 5,000 people have been left to work out how to live in almost complete isolation. Danny has taken it upon himself to speak for the community. He set up the Jazeera Happy Club, a defiant gesture of hope over adversity.
We need to help the younger people, rather than they take the wrong turn because there's no jobs. They might get into bad habits like smoking cannabis or doing drugs or drinking. But we can save these people by giving them opportunities that everyone in every other town has.
Everywhere there are stories of the impact of decline and austerity. John is an unemployed tyre fitter. The government is changing his benefits as part of a deeply controversial new system, which leaves people without money for weeks on end. John has food for 3 more days. But what are you going to do if you get past Wednesday and you've got no food?
Well, I'll have to go around and borrow friends and that.
How do you feel about that?
Not very well, because you don't like borrowing, really. So, and I'll have to get a food parcel or something from the council.
Any old iron? Any old iron?
JJ cycled past. Someone has given him an old gate. He collects and sells bits of scrap metal to make ends meet. It really is what passes for work here.
Whatever I make on it, it goes in the house. For electric, food, whatever we need. That's how we do it around here.
Jazeera made international news recently when it was misleadingly used in a campaign photo for Donald Trump, warning of the effects of socialism on America. Since the photo, the roads have been paved. It's what passes for success here. There are many right-wing politicians and commentators who are absolutely livid that the United Nations is here at all. How dare the UN come to one of the richest countries in the world, they say, and lecture us like this. But it is still a fact that the wealth gap in the UK is now enormous, and poverty in places like Jazeera is both absolute and entrenched. So into all this walked the United Nations rapporteur on poverty and human rights.
Certainly I've heard from a lot of people who are living pretty grim lives. A lot of misery in the country, I think. A lot of the statistics are pretty discouraging in terms of rough sleeping, in terms of child poverty, in terms of at least talk about suicide and so on. So there's obviously a lot of problems there.
Jazeera hopes the United Nations will have left with an impression of a place which is proud and wants nothing more than hope, even if it has a profound sense of injustice. But even if the United Nations is listening, it's not at all clear whether politicians just 100 kilometres away in London have any idea about life here.
Still to come on Counting the Cost, and the winner is Amazon. Why a beauty pageant to host the headquarters of one of the biggest corporations on the planet right now is proving to be somewhat controversial. But first, China could be Iran's most important economic ally. It's one of the most loyal customers when it comes to buying Iranian oil. US economic pressure hasn't spared Chinese businesses, but in the face of penalties from Washington, the Chinese say that they'll stick by Iran. Al Jazeera's Zain Basravi reports from Tehran.
US President Donald Trump has threatened to punish Chinese companies that do business with Iran. But no one at this car parts expo in Tehran seemed too worried. No doubt the wheels of commerce are spinning a little slower in Iran these days, but the history of trade ties between the Persian and Chinese people is older than that of most modern nations. Having cultivated commercial links for so long, many Chinese businesses are now taking the long view of Iran's future.
Maybe there are a big problem for the Iranian for the time being, but the problem will go away in the future. Who will tell you that what things will happen in the future? No one can help. Anyway, Chinese believe that nothing is impossible. And we've seen that the Iranian also is very strong, and we admire that, the spirit of the Iranian. I think we can always find a way to do business with Iran.
The economic climate in Iran is unstable, something that has scared off many investors. But Chinese traders say this is still a strong, resource-rich country with a big population, things that continue to make it a major market for them. But all is not well. The owner of this restaurant came to Iran when he was 16. Against his parents' wishes, he says, he left China to follow the Silk Route like many before him and find his fortune. This time last year, Yusuf Shah's restaurant would have been full. He blames a dip in the number of Chinese business travelers and the fact that many foreigners have left the country.
100%, no doubt. In my opinion, if there were no sanctions, Iran would be #1 in the Middle East. Now, Dubai is the most developed city in the region. If you give Iran 10 years, Iran will become #1.
For some Chinese people, Iran holds a special place in their heart. David Zhao met his girlfriend here.
For Iran, I think it's okay because they've been experiencing the sanction nearly 40 years. They don't care if there's another sanction more. It doesn't matter. But as a Chinese, like, we have more business with Iran. It's getting better, actually.
This market has been serving Tehran's Chinese community since the mid-1900s. These days, it's not as busy as it used to be. But punitive American policies against both China and Iran appear to be pushing the two countries closer together. And if the long arc of Sino-Persian history is anything to go by, seasons change, and the two ancient communities seem set to endure the winter together.
OPEC's top oil producer Saudi Arabia now wants OPEC to cut production as soon as December. Slamming the brakes on oil production is a dramatic turnaround for the cartel, which until recently was ramping up production. So what's happening? Well, most of the world expected Iran's oil output hit by US sanctions to fall to zero. Then the US granted waivers to 8 countries. Then 2 key reports, which came out this week, provided another shock to the system. OPEC's annual report warned of a possible 2019 oil glut, a world where there's just too much supply. The global energy watchdog for the developed world, the IAE, said the same thing. It too highlighted the relentless growth in non-OPEC supply. Well, drilling for oil in shale rock, known as fracking, has dramatically reshaped the global oil industry, and US shale oil production continues to defy expectations. The latest stats show that US crude oil production had hit a record of 11.6 million barrels daily. The IEA predicts the US will rival OPEC when it comes to market share in the years ahead. But some say the new black gold rush in the US is overhyped. Shale is hard to reach and reserves decline quickly. Well, earlier I spoke via Skype from Orvieto in Italy to Giacomo Luciani, who's Professor of Interdisciplinary Programs at the Graduate Institute in Geneva and the co-director of the Executive Master in Oil and Gas Leadership at the Institute. I began by asking him to explain current US oil policy.
Well, it is, as usual, perhaps a policy aiming, pursuing 2 different aims. One is to definitely increase shale oil production, and that is favored by higher prices. And the other is to defend the American consumer against price increases. Trump knows that in terms of his popularity, it's not a good idea if oil prices increase too much. At the moment, it's easy for him because prices are going down and nevertheless are quite sufficient for shale producers to make good money.
Professor, how has the US shale sector become such a force within the industry?
Well, the so-called miracle of shale oil production in the United States has been going on for a long time. And people have been variously proposing that it has stopped or it could not continue. But it's going on. In the last year, the United States have added 1.5 million barrels to oil production, to their oil production. And that's quite remarkable.
Professor, OPEC is predicting a slump in demand in 2019. Are we likely to see an agreement on a production cut at their next meeting?
I think it's difficult because OPEC is of this opinion, but Russia, which is an essential component of any agreement, seems to be of a different opinion. The Russians don't seem ready to cut on their production now. I've never been very happy with prices reaching $80 or more per barrel. And so I thought it's too early for them to react and reduce production. And that makes it very difficult for OPEC as well.
What does the oil market right now tell us about the state of the wider economy globally?
Well, the oil market, as usual, is influenced by the market opinion and sentiment on broader economic data. There is considerable uncertainty about the future of the global economy. Continuing commercial conflict in between the United States and China specifically, and also difficult relations between the United States and Europe, plus the news of the day, Brexit, what will happen about Brexit, the European economy is slowing down again. All of this is not very positive at all.
Is the US becoming a bigger force than OPEC, or can it become a bigger force than OPEC? Or is the US, do you sense at the moment, being perhaps overly confident in its ability to push OPEC around?
Well, I don't think OPEC has such a huge force anymore, certainly not alone. As I said already, they in any case need to ally with non-OPEC, notably Russian producers. The United States are a force. They are not an overwhelming force. They cannot determine the price of oil alone. But they can certainly make their voice and weight heard. And at the moment, they are doing so.
Professor, good to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us, sir.
Thank you very much.
And finally this week, one of the biggest corporations on the planet right now has chosen New York and Virginia to house its new headquarters. But as Al Jazeera's Kristen Salumi reports from New York, not everyone is celebrating.
Over lunch at the Court Square Diner in New York's Long Island City, local residents wonder how their rapidly growing neighborhood will absorb tens of thousands of more people, now that Amazon has announced plans to build a new headquarters here.
It's a whole soccer stadium, one shot to 8 o'clock coming in.
New high-rises and ongoing construction are already straining infrastructure in this once quiet neighborhood overlooking Manhattan.
It's overwhelming and a little bit, it feels very saturated.
The online retail giant promised to bring more than $5 billion in investment and up to 50,000 jobs when it announced a search for what it dubbed HQ2. The Seattle-based company settled on 2 locations in the end, this Virginia suburb of Washington, D.C., in addition to New York, after fierce competition among cities all around the country.
I did offer up I would change my name. I've gotten tired of Andrew anyway.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo once joked that he would change his name to Amazon Cuomo to win the lucrative deal.
I think it would be an economic asset for the entire state. I've said to them personally, I will do whatever I need to do to make it a reality. I will personally get involved.
But besides this fancy promotional video, exactly what incentives he offered the company remain a mystery, and that has some watchdog groups worried.
We've seen that other cities and states are offering billions of dollars, and the state has offered hundreds of millions to other companies in the past in similar situations. And it also could be something that lasts many years. If it's a property tax break, it could be a decade or more. So this is really something that we feel the public has a right to know more about.
New York announced a $180 million investment to improve the area's overloaded subway system after Amazon had expressed a preference for locations with access to mass transit, as well as the potential to attract the most tech-savvy employees.
To me, the Amazon's the new way of life. I don't know if it's an upgrade or downgrade.
Local residents welcome the jobs, but worry they're just being taken for a ride.
And that's our show for this week. If you'd like to comment on anything that you've seen, you can get in touch with us by following and tweeting me on Twitter. I'm at @afinnegan. Please use the hashtag AJCTC when you do. Or you can drop us a line. Our email address is countingthecost@aljazeera.net. As always, there is plenty more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That takes you straight to our page, and there you'll find individual reports, links, even entire episodes for you to catch up on. But that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Adrian Finnegan from the whole team here in Doha. Thanks for being with us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.